Wednesday Addams is evil. No. Yep, it's true, she is, though the show never really acknowledges that. Also, I don't know if that's a problem on itself, but one thing is for sure, whenever I start thinking about this Wednesday show, my brain starts to wander off. For example, if I talk about how well the dialogue is done, I need also to mention that sometimes
it's really difficult to distinguish.
Okay, you know what? Getting a little bit out of hand. Please, everyone, calm down. Could you guys shut up for a second? You know, what does Wednesday said? Shut up! Okay, much better. Let's begin from the start. Wednesday is for sure a show that exists and I like. The show is about a teenage Wednesday Addams, though age is never really specified, who gets into trouble because she tried to kill an entire swimming team. In light of those crimes, she gets sent to a school full of magical creatures, even though they are called outcasts in the show. At first, Wednesday's goal is to escape the school, but after she's almost killed and saved by a monster, later called Hydes, her interest is piqued and she spends the rest of the show trying to figure out who the monster is to bring him to justice? Also, she might or might not be trying to prevent the destruction of Discount Hogwarts. On the first viewing, I didn't care too much about the stupid stuff going on, and I thought it was fine. It's not. While the problems of the show don't necessarily hinder my enjoyment, I think it's still important to talk about the show if it doesn't want to end up like Madeline Fort Salem. You know, a show I made a video about, and that video you should watch because it freaking bangs. Also, Madeline has a lot of similar problems that Wednesday has with its world building. I think the best place to start is the morals of the Addams family.
I can eat Girl Scouts for breakfast. Actually, I have an uncle who went to prison for that.
If I asked any of you what vaguely the Addams family morals are, none of you could give me a comprehensive answer because the show itself doesn't offer one. One of the earliest lines we hear Wednesday say is,
I'm not sure whose twisted idea it was to put hundreds of adolescents in underfunded schools run by people whose dreams were crushed years ago.
So, the first part is pretty base. Schools are indeed constantly overcrowded, underfunded, understaffed, and often run by people that seem to hate themselves and the children they teach. Unfortunately, Wednesday adds,
I admire sadism.
So that would mean that Wednesday actually loves the horrible state schools are in because she admires the sadism. We will see how even these simple statements can have massive problems when it comes to the actual morals of the Addams family later on. This is not the only time, of course, where we will see Wednesday praising or admiring the macabre or straight out crimes, because after she finds out that her brother has been bullied by the swimming team, she then drops piranhas in their pool, almost killing the entire swimming team. Here we have the first problem. Wednesday is completely fine with murder or attempted murder, but her brother being bullied is unacceptable. If you're okay with murder but not okay with bullying, that's kinda weird or hypocritical, so to speak. In this case though, we can assume that Wednesday reacts this way because either she is the only one that can bully her brother, she actually just says that directly,
the only person who gets to torture my brother is me,
or she actually likes him. Maybe both. The love part is kinda supported when Wednesday is left by her family at Nevermore Academy and she tells Pugsley,
You're soft and weak. You'll never survive without me.
I give you 2 months, tops.
While at first this sounds like she's scolding him, when we pull the curtain of disinterest and malice that veils Wednesday at all times, it sounds more like she will miss him in 2 months. Another important thing is that she lets her brother hug her, something that nobody else is allowed to do except for her father Gomez, and at the end of the story, her best friend Enid.
And they were roommates.
Oh my god, they were roommates.
We get further confirmation that in the Addams family murder is acceptable or even praised when Wednesday's mother Morticia is talking about Wednesday's crime record.
Darling, we aren't the ones who got you expelled. That boy's family was going to file attempted murder charges. How would that have looked on your record?
Terrible. Everyone would know I failed to get the job done.
It is pretty clear that attempted murder is actually a bad thing and murder is the desired outcome. I think we can pretty much say that murder is good. For them, except when it isn't. Episode 5 brings the Addams family back into the picture, and we find out that indeed Gomez is responsible for the death of a fellow called Garrett Gates. When Gomez gets arrested by local authorities, they are suddenly sad about it. Understandable for a family that has a more conventional morals where murder is not good, but not for the Addams family. Not even the show can seem to agree with itself how the Addams should feel in this situation. A flashback reveals to us that as soon as Gomez gets arrested by the police, Morticia reacts like this.
I don't know what to say, Gomez. Seeing you in handcuffs, accused of murder. I've never loved you more.
For her, Gomez becomes even more attractive after being branded a criminal. We can still see that Morticia has a pained expression when Gomez gets taken away, but then again, what do you expect when your loved ones get arrested? The whole problem with this is the Addams moral compass. I assume the Addams know murder will put them into prison, but they don't like being locked up. If you don't want to be locked up, you shouldn't praise murder. Right? I guess you could come up with a moral system that allows you to see murder as a good thing, but the show never really tries to offer one. So either the Addams are stupid or they are immoral. While many people like to credit morals to religion, our morals, and by extension our laws, are a much more pragmatic nature. Do unto others as you want to do unto you. Often called the golden rule, is a bit vague, but nevertheless useful. If you don't want to be murdered, don't murder. Easy. The Addams though seem to think more along the lines of rules for thee and not for me, which would actually make them evil people. Wednesday in this situation is even worse because we are not entirely sure what she thinks. When the Addams find themselves in a family therapy session, Wednesday confronts her parents with the murder of Garrett Gates.
It seems they've been lying to me, keeping secrets. Murderous secrets that need to be addressed. Who was Garrett Gates and why are you accused of murdering him?
It is unclear if Wednesday cares about the actual murder or the lies. Either way, it would be inconsistent with how she behaves overall. If Wednesday is actually appalled at the murder, that is called being a stinking hypocrite because she tried to kill an entire swimming team and felt bad when she actually didn't kill anyone. So let us assume that she is actually appalled at the fact that the parents lied to her. Well, Wednesday does really not care about lies. The best example is in episode 6, where the school is in lockdown and she needs a way out so she can investigate the Gates mansion. She lies to her friend Enid that they are going on a girls' night out, and she lies to her quasi-boyfriend and gets them into massive danger by bringing them into an abandoned house where potentially a monster could be housed. By the way, Wednesday has no physical powers. I think it's important to mention this here, and we'll talk about how Wednesday would have worked better as an actual vampire. There are of course more examples, but this one shows that Wednesday could not give two crepes about lying. But towards the end, it seems that the show wants you to think that Wednesday is changing. That's more referring to Wednesday's feelings rather than actual morals. So yeah, lying is not something Wednesday is against. We don't know why Wednesday is even investigating her family murder, and the only thing I can assume is that she's interested in finding out the truth. The problem is that the show doesn't make any efforts to clarify it, damaging Wednesday as a character. Had she said, "I'm only interested in the truth because it could help me with my investigations," I would have understood her motivations, but as far as this one goes, she is reacting this way because the plot demands it. Okay, now we find ourselves in this really strange position where the Addams are fine with murder, but not okay with being incarcerated, even though they probably know it is a consequence of murder. They are fine with lying, but only when it benefits them, and the golden rule for life is rules for thee, not for me. Wednesday Addams is unironically an evil person in a school full of werewolves, vampires, gorgons, and sirens. And you know what? An actual evil character as the main protagonist of the show would have been cool to see, but the problem is that they get cold feet.
So, you're not going to the Raven either?
Actually, I am.
Having a coherent worldview for the Addams family is difficult because they were conceptualized as a joke. It was satirizing conservative lifestyles of the 1930s. The Addams family is still very much a nuclear family with a husband, wife, 2 children, a grandmother and an uncle. They are extremely rich, being able to have a mansion, have a car and all sorts of luxury goods. The Addams do reverse certain tropes, like for example with a short husband and a tall wife, adoring raining and stormy ways, finding that attempted murder is actually totally fine even for their children, not having conventional pets like cats and dogs, but rather something like scorpions and alligators. And as long as these things stay in little vignettes, satirizing lifestyles of the conservatives' 1930s family, it works. There's not much continuity, it's not telling an overarching story, it is making fun of conservative ideas in a joking manner, and sometimes it shows the absurdity of what some conservatives think. Important to note here is that even in those small snippets, it becomes clear that the Addams deeply love each other and care about each other, even if the way they show it is weird. This of course stands in stark contrast to the trope that conservative families, while showing outwardly that they love each other, internally they couldn't stand even sitting at the same table. Given the history of especially religious conservatives all around the world who have children that don't talk to them anymore, or children that have been scarred for life because of religiously justified abuse, or children that always hated every strict rule that never allowed them to grow, I think that's a pretty fair criticism that can be derived from the Addams family strips. In the 1930s, that was revolutionary because it was a smart way to criticize the status quo and fly under the radar. We don't live in the 1930s anymore, and dressing in black, liking rainy stormy weather and having exotic pets is not really weird anymore, or at least it's not demonized. So the problem arises when you try to make a coherent worldview for the Addams family because it's almost impossible. They are a reaction to an ideology or way of life and not an alternative. If the conservatives like fish, well then the Addams hate it. If the conservatives hate fire, well then the Addams love it. If the conservative is unsure about the gays, well then the Addams are 100% sure about the gays. In which way they are sure, nobody really knows, but they certainly are sure. So, when constructing an Addams family moral compass, a writer would need to come up with an entire ideology that justifies murder, lies, and torture without being a completely unhinged lunatic. Did Wednesday's show succeed in that matter? Because I don't think anyone put any thought into any of this, but similar to the comic strips, they succeeded in making little vignettes. We already talked about the scene where Wednesday complains about her record would look horrible since she only would be charged with attempted murder. If we take the rest of the show into context though, this makes no sense because Wednesday seems to be against killing people, even though her dialogue constantly tells us otherwise. This little snippet without the overall context is actually a funny joke, almost like it could be drawn as a comic strip. In the same episode, we have a scene where this happens.
She's been smothering me with hospitality. I hope to return the favor. In her sleep.
As a little funny vignette, that's smart. It's a play on words. Sure, Wednesday wants to kill her roommate, but without further context, that's funny. Unfortunately, these two become best friends by the end of the show, but I don't know why. If someone threatened to kill me with a prior record of trying to kill others and maybe succeeding, I would feel very unsafe around them. In Enid's case, it's a bit different because she's a werewolf, but that just makes Wednesday look stupid. There's no way Wednesday, the human, will be able to smother a werewolf to death even during their sleep. The problem of jokes being fun only out of context does not only affect Wednesday itself though. For example, once Wednesday breaks into the morgue to gather evidence for her investigations, she makes a crime board showing all the victims and their sliced off parts. She gives those pictures to Enid, and Enid promptly faints, causing Wednesday to say,
Fetch your smelling salts. Again.
Funny out of context, but Enid is a werewolf. She eats meat, she has probably seen many dead animals. Looking at cut off human parts should be completely normal to her. This joke is made to show how hardcore Wednesday is and that nothing affects her at the cost of the colorful and bubbly roommate that is weak because they can't look at cut off human parts even though they're a werewolf. Given the benefit of the doubt, you could say that Enid at this point is not as hardcore as Wednesday, and that is why she is having problems with actually turning into a werewolf, and through Wednesday she is hardened and is able to turn. Unfortunately, Enid turns into a werewolf because she's worried about Wednesday and not because she grew less attached. If the intention was to provide a certain contrast and evolution of Enid, the execution is not quite there. Even minor characters have moments that could be funny in snippets or completely different contexts. Fairly early on in the show, Wednesday gets introduced to the cliques of the school, and Ajax, later Enid's boyfriend, says this.
Oh, you're in black and white. Like a living Instagram filter.
As a snippet, this could be seen as a joke on how boomers write teens. Unfortunately, it is played pretty straight and the context doesn't make it better. We should not forget that this is a school of quite literal monsters. You have vampires, werewolves, gorgons, sirens, shapeshifters, faceless people, and psychics. Ajax should not be impressed at all with how Wednesday looks. In fact, he should be pretty much unimpressed because Wednesday at this point is pretty much just a human as far as the other characters know. Also, Enid knows what a goth girl is, and since she is the local blogger, literally everyone should know what a goth girl is, making the comment from Ajax even more stupid. Hopefully you can see that adding context to those small vignettes makes them worse. If you find them funny or smart, you're not necessarily wrong, but in the wider show's context, they kind of like fall apart. That isn't to say that sometimes, be it through luck or actually thinking about it, that the writers came up with something that almost hits the mark.
Careful. That's my cold shoulder.
After Wednesday is dropped off at Nevermore Academy and the Addams family say their goodbyes, Morticia and Wednesday have this exchange.
I am not you, Mother. I will never fall in love or be a housewife or have a family.
I'm told girls your age say hurtful things. I shouldn't take it to heart.
Fortunately, you don't have one.
Finally, a kind word for your mother.
I think this is a great dialogue that translates the ideas of the Addams family into understandable language to the point that we get what these people want to say, even if it's odd. Still, let's take a deeper look of what is actually being said and if that is in line with how the Addams family should think. As far as we know, the Addams family are okay with robbery, murder, torture, cannibalism, and lies. They know those things are against the common law, but for them it seems to be a sign of strength. Strangely enough, they're also somehow not okay with being imprisoned or lied to. It is inconsistent, but generally speaking, they see good things as bad and bad things as good. This is also mirrored in their language and outlook on life. For example, when the Addams are driving towards Nevermore, Morticia says this.
At least it's turning into a beautiful day.
It solidifies that even in language, bad equals good, though here the writers are either purposefully keeping the original meaning of the word wonderful, or they never thought that Morticia should actually say a horrible day with a more cheerful demeanor, as signaling to the viewer that horrible is indeed good. Now, if we come back to the exchange between Morticia and Wednesday, the first sentence is this.
I am not you, Mother. I will never fall in love, or be a housewife, or have a family.
Since the Addams think roughly good equals bad and bad equals good, what Wednesday is saying here should be actually welcomed by Morticia. Normally a parent would be sad that their child doesn't want to follow their footsteps, but wouldn't the Addams be excited about that? Yet, Morticia answers with,
I'm told girls your age say hurtful things. I shouldn't take it to heart.
Here it's difficult to distinguish if hurtful is still having the original meaning or hurtful is actually a good thing in Morticia's mind. The tone would suggest that hurtful still has its original meaning. Generally speaking, while the Addams see bad equals good, tone for the most part is kept the same. Anyways, after Wednesday says that Morticia doesn't have the heart, Morticia remarks that this is a kind word from Wednesday. Again, it is difficult to distinguish if Morticia thinks that kind is a good thing or a bad thing, but given that she smiles and seems to be cheerful, I assume that kind still has its original meaning. The question remains, why is Morticia hurt by what Wednesday is saying? Wednesday not being like her mother should be seen by Morticia as a good thing. If they're supposed to think that roughly good equals bad, then Wednesday not wanting to follow her mother's footsteps should be welcomed by Morticia. Otherwise we would have a direct reversal of the Addams family idea. They would have turned into conservatives. You know, the thing that originally the Addams are supposed to be making fun of. A conservative family would be upset if their child is refusing to follow into their footsteps. Despite all the inconsistencies, we still understand what these characters are trying to say because our brains automatically translate the meaning, especially because Catherine Zeta-Jones and Jenna Ortega absolutely kill their delivery. Another trick that the writers apply to be able to use the opposite language and still make understandable dialogue is by adding "not in a good way" at the end of a sentence. Here we have two great examples. When the Addams are driving together and Morticia and Gomez are being extremely lovely to each other, Wednesday says this.
You guys are making me nauseous. Not in a good way.
If Wednesday just said that she feels nauseous, it would be even more incoherent than it already is. The writers could have written happy or pleasant, but you guys are making me happy or you guys are making me feel pleasant just sounds so wrong. Maybe instinctively whoever wrote this understood that it would be better to write nauseous and add not in a good way to make it clear to the viewer that in this specific situation nauseous is a bad thing, but in every consecutive use of this word it would be good. Another example of this is when Wednesday is talking to Thing after he fails to do a job correctly and starts sulking. Some emotional blackmail later, she opens up and shows Thing what will potentially happen in the future and says,
Not good terrible like Ivan. Bad terrible.
Again, they managed to translate the whole good equals bad without it sounding like an unhinged ramblings of a madman. The bigger problem here though is again the overall context of who Ivan the Terrible was. Ivan IV Vasilyevich was for a time Russia's Tsar. He was responsible for the extermination of a city called Novigrad because of perceived betrayal by the religious orthodoxy. His power hunger grew so much that he executed all of his advisors. He killed his own son out of anger and presumably abused his wife, which led to a bunch of stillbirths. Calling him terrible is an understatement because Ivan is a vile monster. So, when Wednesday says,
Not good terrible like Ivan. Bad terrible.
That doesn't make much sense for Wednesday. Burning a school doesn't even come close to what Ivan the Terrible did. She should be ecstatic that she's going to be responsible for something terrible like this, right? I don't know if the writers noticed this, but there would have been an interesting figure here to have as a role model, and that would be Vlad the Impaler, or also known as Dracula. Vlad the Impaler, while not necessarily a better person than Ivan, was at least fighting for a cause. He's probably responsible for 80,000 deaths, but one must add that the province of Wallachia, also known as Transylvania and today located in Romania, was the one main stage of the conflict between the Ottomans and the Europeans, or Christians versus Muslims. Unlike Ivan, Vlad had reasons for doing the horrible things that he did, and while impalement is a cruel form of torture, this probably in the long term diminished the amount of conflicts Wallachia had to go through and decreased the amount of deaths in Transylvania and Europe as a whole. Vlad is so much more interesting because his existence basically asks the questions, can evil people do good things?
In case you're wondering, I don't hold seances very often. I can barely tolerate the living.
If you haven't figured out by now, even though I said it a few times, Wednesday's evil. I think it should have become pretty clear after I mentioned that she tried to kill an entire swimming team, but I just wanted to make it clear, Wednesday is unironically an evil person. She lies, she murders, she has literally no problem torturing people based on flimsy imaginary evidence, but the moment it's done to her, she flips out. Rules for Dee, not for me. I actually love that. I'll have zero problems with Wednesday being evil, though the show never acknowledges that Wednesday is evil. Be that as it is, the question, can evil people do good things, is actually answered in the show several times. After a mysterious figure tries to kill Wednesday, she's saved by depressed artist and generic love interest number 1. He's just like me, for real! And after Wednesday scolds him for saving her, we find out that Wednesday actually saved him in the past, though she doesn't remember because that was never her intention. Xavier Thorpe, grandson of Wednesday's grandmother partner in crime, adds scamming and swindling to the list of things that the Addams are totally fine with. Was playing with Wednesday hide and seek and he got trapped in his grandmother's coffin. Wednesday, thinking that it was actually the grandmother coming back from the dead, opens up the coffin by accident and saves Xavier from being burned alive. Had she known Xavier was in the coffin, she would have left Xavier to burn because that's who Wednesday is. The only reason she saved him is because she's probably more interested in the dead than the living. This of course would make sense because Wednesday hates pretty much everyone, so loving the dead would make sense.
I can barely tolerate the living. Why would I want to commune with the dead?
Yeah, the show just throws this extremely easy win out of the window. Anyways, by Wednesday being a self-interested person that just wanted to see an undead person, she saved someone's life. So, can evil people do good things? Yeah. The show says yeah. Of course, this is not the only situation in which Wednesday is doing something out of self-interest or straight out malice while helping someone else in the process. Since Wednesday has been the center of attention in Evermore in the first week of school, Principal Weems demands that Wednesday joins a club to keep herself busy and sniff around so much. Even though there are people dying, it seems that pretty much everyone wants just to cover up the fact that there's a literal monster on the loose. We'll talk about how stupid that is later, but we need to focus on this one first. So, Wednesday tries a few clubs out, but she's too good for every one of them, and she lands with Eugene, the apiarist, also known as Best B-Boy. After he asks Wednesday,
"Are you willing to feel the sting?"
Wednesday promptly joins, and you might think that she joins because she sees Eugene as a fellow masochist, but that couldn't be further from the main reason why she chooses this as her extracurricular activity. Eugene also mentions this.
Most kids are afraid of venomous insects.
Since Wednesday is forced to join a club, this will provide the perfect cover for her. Not only is the apiary a bit further away from the main building, it has its own clubhouse, no other kid other than Eugene is in the club, and he's also completely spineless Sam. You could assume that Wednesday is also joining the club because Eugene reminds her of her brother, but as I already mentioned, even if she loves him, Wednesday regularly tortures her brother.
I never thought I'd miss being waterboarded so much.
Even if she likes Eugene, it wouldn't be because he is his own person. It would be because, like her brother, he can be manipulated extremely easy and is an outcast in a school full of outcasts. Ironic. I know. With all that said, Wednesday is making Eugene still happy because 1, she shares the love for feminist creatures, and we know that because she had a pet scorpion, and 2, she is the only other person that joins the club, giving Eugene hopes that girls might like this hobby as well. Given that the internet exists, the fact that Eugene thinks that no girls like apiary is kinda stupid. Anyways, as you can guess, yes, evil people can do good things even if they're acting completely in their own self-interest. But wait! There's more! Through some shenanigans, Wednesday is beaten by Bianca in a saber match, which should be literally physically impossible, except if Bianca was cheating with her siren powers. Wednesday is trained in several martial arts. She is extremely strong and smart for a human, and her loss is just the plot happening to her. The loss, of course, makes Wednesday
feeling a mixture of rage, pity, and self-disgust.
Add the fact that Wednesday also finds out that Bianca doesn't like her very much. She decides to join a school tournament to beat Bianca and basically enact petty revenge, which I stand. I do not only support women's rights, I also support women's wrongs. She of course succeeds in this petulant attempt of revenge, in the process making her roommate, a later friend, happy because they finally win a tournament in years. Something that only happened decades ago. Can evil people do good things? Absolutely, yes, they can. We are not done yet, because in the next episode, the whole school has to participate in the so-called Outreach Day. And Wednesday's task is to work at the antique shop with Ajax. That's the Gorgon Enid is in love with, if you don't remember. Being the whole day in the shop though would stop her from investigating, and so she switches task with Enid. Well, this indeed helps Enid. The only reason why this is beneficial to her is because Ajax is in there and not because the task is fun. It is pretty clear that Enid doesn't want to do it before Wednesday brings up the fact that her crush is going to be there. In the same episode, she helps Eugene out of being bullied, not because she actually cares about bullying, but because she needs someone to keep watch while she breaks into a museum and steals a book. Side note here, humans bullying outcasts knowing that they have powers is extremely stupid. If the worry is that outcasts are gonna be stereotyped, Eugene's powers are undetectable because he can control bees. All of this actually reminds me a lot of Motherland Fort Salem, because pretty much every mistake that happens here happens in Motherland as well. By the way, watch the video, give me money on Patreon, subscribe if you like, and also leave a like and comment. It seems to me that the show is actually trying to make a point. Wednesday is an evil character, her morals and language are inconsistent, but in a wacky world full of wacky people, evil people completely driven by self-interest can do good things. If you never read the show this way, that's not your fault, because if I ask anyone right now what Wednesday was actually about, nobody would be able to give me an answer, because the show itself just wants to make Wednesday to be the good guy, even though she's not. Not surprising given that the writers barely care about inconsistencies.
By the way, there are 2 Ds in Addams.
I think the beginning of the show is fairly effective in creating Wednesday as a character and a bigger world. Early on, we find out that Wednesday seems to enjoy pain since she mentions this.
Feel like electroshock therapy, but without the satisfying afterburn.
Reading deeper into this, she might also just have a high resistance to damage, or just a resistance to electricity, though stabbing will kill her. Anyways, she can also see visions from the past and future when she touches people and is emotionally loaded. The visions will always be relating to the person she is touching or thinking about. When she touches her brother, she sees something relating to him. When she touches a barn, she sees something that happened at the barn. When she touches Tyler, she sees her POV, and so on. This is, I think, an effective way to introduce you into this world. We're not only told that magic exists, it is being used in this case to move the plot along without it being forced. This is also the only time it's used this way. Every other time is just Wednesday getting stuck in her investigation and then getting a vision. We already mentioned several times that Wednesday then tries to kill an entire swimming team. Yay, slay, go queen. We also already talked about the morality of the Addams and how it's extremely inconsistent and basically makes them evil. But now, let's talk about the legality. First of all, we have roughly 9 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of physical assault, since the kid seems to have lost his balls. The Addams must be extremely rich and have the best lawyers to ever exist on the planet Earth to be able to box Wednesday out of the situation. Her being expelled should be the smallest worries of the Addams, and it's not like the Addams are unaware of what the consequences of murder are. I don't even need to take our laws as a reference point for the show. These laws exist in this universe.
Darling, we aren't the ones who got you expelled. That boy's family was going to file attempted murder charges.
You're under arrest for the murder of Garrett Gates.
Okay, so what's going on here? Well, as explained earlier, it's difficult to even come up with a moral compass that would justify the Addams' behavior. But on top of that, the world building in itself is set on fire with gasoline and thrown into the sun every time they want to tell a joke. Wednesday can murder, lie, manipulate, and that's totally fine as long as it's funny. And you know what? It doesn't take much to fix these problems. I already said that making Wednesday actually evil would be better, but not only that. What if Nevermore was a psychiatric state prison for children of extremely rich people? Not only would the uniforms fit in with the stripes, the gangs, in quotation marks, would make much more sense, the name Outcasts would fit way better, and them having powers could be more of a joke, though you could also make them real. You just would need to think about them for longer than 5 seconds. With this simple change, you not only fix the problem that Wednesday's actually an evil person, you could also actually address the problems with Wednesday's crimes, and now the joke.
Darling, we aren't the ones who got you expelled. That boy's family was going to file attempted murder charges.
Could be even expanded that she has been charged with violent assault instead of attempted murder. Violent assault would of course be better for the Addams than attempted murder. So I'm talking about holes, and we're barely 2 minutes into the show, and everything is a mess. But hey, at least the visuals are pretty and the music sounds nice, and I like that. Since we already talked about the Addams themselves and about their morals, let's touch up on the school a little bit. Nevermore Academy, not to be confused with the webtoon Nevermore Academy, is a school full of outcasts. Outcasts are magical or monstrous half-humans ranging from more modern folktales like werewolves and more ancient ones like gorgons. When Edith introduces us to the school, she says that there are 4 social groups of outcasts.
But the 4 main cliques are Fangs, Furs, Stoners, and Scales. Those are the Fangs, aka vampires. Some of them have literally been here for decades.
Okay, we have introduced one group, and there are already like a billion problems. Once you finish your final exam, you are gone from school. Even if you do not pass, at a certain age, you are kicked out of school, so no, they cannot be here for the literal decades. You could fix this by having Enid say, some have weird similarities to their ancestors, almost like they have been here for literal decades. She is the local blogger after all, and rumor queen, and so that would make sense that she's a local rumor spreader. It doesn't make it less weird that decades or even millennia old creatures are hanging around 18-year-olds, but that is at least better than actually confirming that vampires are weirdo creeps. Vampires in general seem to be the butt of many jokes in the story. When Wednesday is searching for a book in the library and Miss Thornhill meets her there, she mentions that she has seen 2 vampires fanging at each other. I'm pretty sure that is meant to be a funny pun to replace the word banging, but like the vampires, the show has no fangs. Yoko is the only vampire we meet, and she doesn't even speak except for one line at the end of the show where she says this.
That's it, I'm out.
That happens once she sees Wednesday trying to torture a guy. A vampire. That is not okay with torturing a human. That could be funny as a joke, but given that we practically don't know anything about vampires in this world, this just makes vampires look like losers, especially because Wednesday is set up as this boss bitch, and in this specific case, she's correct. Since we are talking about vampires, allow me to get on a side tangent. In the show, we have main characters with a considerable amount of screen time from every major gang. Those being Enid with the werewolves, Bianca with the sirens, Ajax with the stoners, and Xavier with the psychics. Yoko is the only vampire with one speaking role and a bit of screen time, but vampires as a whole are absent from the show. Throughout the show, Wednesday does certain things that could be justified if she was a vampire. For example, during the Raven, blood rains from the sprinklers, and upon Wednesday licking it, she is disappointed that it isn't real pig's blood. Why would Wednesday even care? And why is she licking blood? As a vampire, that makes sense. As a human, not so much. In the same episode, when she gets a vision about Eugene getting killed, she just starts running towards his position. But what was she going to do? She's still human. As a vampire though, I would assume that she would be able to go head on with a monster. Another thing is that Wednesday is in a school full of outcasts, right? So everyone in this school must have some sort of magical power. Yet literally nobody knows that Wednesday has any powers when she enters the school. For all intents and purposes, she is just a human. She would be the first normie in the outcast school, and quite literally nobody bats an eye. If she was a vampire though, that would subtly make a lot of sense. Interesting here as well is that Enid is a werewolf, and so having a natural antagonistic dynamic towards her would make sense since vampires and werewolves are typically depicted as arch nemesis. Overcoming that hurdle and accepting the differences, like the show pretends to do with the characters, would now actually work. Even the Addams family morals would suddenly not matter much. For creatures that live centuries after centuries, having a rules for thee, not for me mentality would be very fitting since they can quite literally not be killed except in very specific ways. Vampires seeing themselves as superior would indeed be something that could work. That would also provide at least some justification for the villain of the show and why he wants to eradicate all of them. My whole point here is that I think the show might have actually been conceptualized as something completely else before being forced into the Addams franchise. This would explain why a lot of things don't seem to make sense. Anyways, why are there only 4 social groups in the school? What about the faceless people, the shapeshifters, the psychics, like the literal guy we get introduced in this segment, like Xavier? Did they just join the 4 groups? And if this is a school of outcasts, why they're not mixing? They're outcasts, right? Their official name is outcasts, meaning outcasts from society. Shouldn't they reverse the trope of being like normies? Enid, right before she introduces Wednesday to this social groups, says,
The whole snarky goth girl thing might have worked at normie school, but here things are different.
No, Enid. Here things are not different. It is pretty much exactly the same as in other normie schools. You just wear darker color palettes and have superpowers. You would expect a show about Wednesday Addams in a school full of literal monsters called outcasts to either not play into conventional teen high school drama tropes or at least subvert them, but apparently that's too much to ask. The show can even keep itself consistent for a minute, because Enid comments on how there are rumors that Wednesday killed a kid in her old school.
Rumors been swirling around that you killed a kid at your old school and your parents pulled strings to get you off.
And Wednesday answers with this.
Actually, it was 2 kids, but who's counting?
No, Wednesday. It was roughly 9 kids. I have no idea where the 2 come from, and why didn't she just say it was a pool of kids? Wednesday itself is a sea of contradictions that never ends, and I actually mean that. Once Enid and Wednesday move in, Wednesday criticized Enid for her blog's grammar and how she spelled Addams wrong. So, little question. How is Wednesday reading the blog? Not only does Wednesday hate social media,
I find social media to be a soul-sucking void of meaningless affirmation.
She doesn't have a phone.
I don't have a phone. I refuse to be a slave to technology.
And she uses a computer for the first time after she has read Enid's blog.
So what happened to not wanting to be a slave to technology?
Desperate times.
We not only have an actual hole in the story because Wednesday couldn't have read Enid's blog since she doesn't have a computer or phone and doesn't want to use social media, Wednesday also specifically says,
I refuse to be a slave to technology.
But also being able to fix a modern coffee machine and writing on an old school typewriter. That's technology. That's literally what we consider technology. It would have been quite easy to ameliorate this problem as well if Wednesday just said, I don't want to be enslaved to my modern technology. You guys are starting to understand my frustration when talking about the show. I can't mention one problem without mentioning all the things surrounding it and dragging it down. Once you pull on one thread, half of the fabric is gone. I could continue to bring up the little things that slowly whittle down the plot, but we would be here forever. You can try to find an explanation for a few of those things, but I don't think the writers necessarily cared. Nevertheless, I do want to talk about the plot a little bit.
Over? Tonight was just the icing on the birthday cake you couldn't even be bothered to cut.
If I said the plot has been mishandled, that is an understatement, because even though the show insists there is a murder mystery taking place, there isn't. The question of does Wednesday actually solve this murder mystery is answered with a clear, no. So, it turns out that the villain of the story is Joseph Crackstone, the founder of Jericho. One of his descendants, called Laurel Gates, who turns out to be Miss Thornhill, revives him through necromancy, and his end goal is to destroy the skull and reclaim his land. So, the magic-hating racist is revived through magic, and then suddenly has magical powers which he wants to use to destroy the magical creatures. He also wants to reclaim his land, forgetting the fact that he's a colonist. That should tell you pretty much everything about the plot, and I think it's a pretty fruitless exercise pointing out every single thing wrong with the story because it's written in such a way that the writers make things happen if it makes sense or not. There are three big things I want to focus on, and that's Xavier, the adults, and Crackstone himself. Throughout the show, Wednesday starts to suspect that Xavier, who is love interest number 1, is the monster, and the therapist, Dr. Kimbot, is the monster's handler, because it turns out that hides don't necessarily just spawn out of nowhere. They can be brought out through therapy, and the hides are extremely loyal to her masters. Wednesday finds out at some point that Xavier has been going to Dr. Kimbot, but so does literally everyone in Jericho and in Evermore. Him going to Dr. Kimbot is the most normal thing ever. Her being suspicious makes no sense. There's another thing that is never established in the show concretely, but it seems that outcasts can only have one power. There is no psychic vampire or siren werewolf, so as far as Wednesday goes, she must know that Xavier has one power: psychic drawings. Therefore, the logic must follow that Xavier can't be a Hyde. You could argue that Wednesday is thinking that Xavier is drawing the monster and letting it out, but not only has Xavier been slashed by his own drawing, basically confirming that he's not in control of the monster, but Wednesday also knows that a Hyde is a human, or at least half human. Now, given that every outcast in Nevermore has a power, literally no one can be a freaking Hyde in Nevermore. Even after Wednesday finds all of this out, she's still 100% convinced that Xavier is the monster. My brother in Christ. What shrooms have you been smoking? And can I have some?
Tyler used me to frame you. He is the actual Hyde.
How do you know?
I've heard a few times through a few videos that Miss Thornhill is pretty clear the twist villain, but that is a meta argument. We know Thornhill is played by previous Wednesday, therefore she is gonna relate to a twist. In the show though, there's literally nothing that points even slightly that Thornhill is the twist villain. Wednesday herself doesn't even find out that Miss Thornhill is the villain. The only reason it comes out is because Eugene wakes up at the end of the show after being in a coma for the whole time, telling Wednesday the color of the perpetrator's boots are red like Thornhill and not Dr. Kimbot. And Dr. Kimbot, her first and only guess, quite literally gets killed. By the way, Thornhill killed the mayor of the city in a hospital after driving him over, but she did not kill Eugene. This is so fundamentally stupid that I need to explain how stupid this is. The mayor, who seems to be the only person actually interested in solving the crime, finds out that Laurel Gates is actually not dead. To silence him, Thornhill, or Laurel Gates, drives him over as he's walking to tell the sheriff this new information. He's then hospitalized and promptly killed by Thornhill or Laurel inside of a hospital. The mayor of Jericho was killed in a hospital and nobody noticed. There was an attempt made on his life and literally nobody tried to secure his room. We know that there are quite a few deputies in this city. Could nobody have spared some time to protect the mayor in the hospital after someone made an attempt on his life? Do you understand how stupid this is? Oh, by the way, this doesn't even end here. Wednesday stole away in the mayor's car, that's not important, but she's questioned by the sheriff, and after she mentions that the mayor was investigating the Gates mansion, he doesn't believe her for some reason. There is a literal voice message from the mayor to the sheriff saying that they need to talk. And even if there wasn't a message, one of the sheriff's closest friends has almost been murdered. Don't you think they would immediately act if they received information from someone that was quite literally in their car? Do you understand how incredibly stupid all of this is? And we're still not done. If we take a look at the two adults involved in this whole ordeal, I have to ask what is going through their heads. Sheriff Gulpin is the father of Tyler, and he knows his wife was a Hyde. I don't know about you, but if I had a son, a descendant of a Hyde, and suddenly murder started to happen around the town, and the victims were not dried from blood, or the body parts were eaten, they were not stoned, or just stabbed with a knife, I would be highly suspicious of my own son. Especially since it seems that the outcasts, even though they have vampires and werewolves, don't seem to kill people on the regular. Outcasts are so safe to the point that normal human beings will just bully them. Yeah, so maybe as a father to a descendant of a Hyde, I would start to question if murder started happening in my town. Also, it's kind of implied towards the end that Gulpin knows who the Hyde is, but everything is so rushed that I don't know if it was intended or not. Okay, maybe Gulpin is just a moron. But what about director Weems? Weems is the shapeshifter, and she knows Hydes exist. When confronted with this information, she does nothing. Given that there are no Hydes at school, she should know that the perpetrator is not at freaking Nevermore. For some reason though, she just lets Xavier get incarcerated for a crime he has not done. She also knows that Tyler's mom was a Hyde. So, my brother in Jesus, mother loving Christ, what are you smoking? And can I have some? It also seems that Gulpin and Weems are constantly trying to cockblock Wednesday while also not being interested at all in the investigation. People are being killed by a monster and nobody gives a shit. It is understandable that Weems and Gulpin are trying to save Jericho's and Nevermore's public image, but it's not understandable that they are not even trying to solve the murders. The worst part about all of this is when Wednesday finally gets Tyler and wants to find out if he is a monster or not, and she doesn't even think about the obvious solution that she quite literally used 5 seconds earlier. So once Wednesday and the gang confronts Tyler, Bianca the Siren uses her power to knock him out. Bianca could just say, "Tell us if you're the Hyde," and it would work. Because she has freaking siren powers! She's quite literally a natural truth sayer. She can get truth out of people without torture. Has anyone thought about the implications of siren powers in the show for longer than 5 seconds? I don't think so. We are not done yet, because Joseph Crackstone might be one of the most blandest, most stupid villains I ever seen. We already mentioned that he's a magic-hating wizard, but it does get worse. As we know, Wednesday can have certain visions, and as it turns out, Crackstone is just a normal human from the past that persecuted outcasts. The writers understand that if you give people literal powers, nuclear levels of power, you cannot make them victims anymore. The whole reason why minority groups are suppressed and scapegoated is because they are powerless. All of this actually reminds me a lot of Madeleine Fort Salem, because pretty much every mistake that happens here happens in Motherland as well. By the way, watch the video, give me money on Patreon, subscribe if you like, and also leave a like and comment. In a vain attempt to position outcasts as the victims of a racist wild colonialist, they bungled up their message so hard that I don't even know what they're trying to say. Wednesday's predecessor, Goody Addams, who, by the way, is also a white Spanish settler, is an extremely powerful witch, to the point that she sealed Crackstone's souls in a freaking coffin. Is anyone starting to understand the dynamic here? Outcasts are extremely powerful. If they wanted, they could raise Jericho to the ground. And yet, for some reason, the knockoff Christopher Columbus is a threat. The show, of course, knowing that, just gives him magical powers for no reason. Because what is Joseph Crackstone, the white, colonialist, racist human, going to do in a school full of vampires, sirens, gorgons, shapeshifters, and much more going to do? My brother, in heaven loving Christ, what are you all smoking? And can I please have some? Try to talk about the specifics of the story in Wednesday is pointless, because it doesn't matter how many details you bring up, you just end up with more questions, more flaws, and more holes. Some things might turn out to be quite clever, like the fact that if you know that Tyler is the Hyde, you can spot that early on when Wednesday has a vision of the Hyde while touching Tyler, but those moments are very rare. Other things might just get worse and worse and worse the more you look into it and think about it, like the fact that Miss Thornhill revives the magic-hating racist with magic. One thing is for sure, the show is consistently inconsistent.
I'm not gonna even ask what this is, but I never saw the two of you here. You got it? Unbelievable.
Trying to come up with a coherent video about Wednesday is something I'm simply not capable of. I simply lack the talent and the practice to do such a thing. Confusion is the main feeling Wednesday brings out of me, because on the one hand you have wonderful actors set in an extremely beautiful world with a fabulous garderobe, and on the other hand you had a bunch of holes everywhere, characters that will act out of character for a joke, and a completely inconsistent set of morals and motivations for every single character. Imagine like this. When trying to open a jar, you could simply brute force it. It would work, not the most elegant solution, but it works. You could just simply let the air out by prying up the lid. It's pretty simple, and all you need is a tool. What the writers did though, is just smash the glass. Despite everything I said, I do love the show, the same way I love Madeleine Fort Salem. But I do ask myself how long it will take until opinions will shift and people will start to realize how bad everything is written. Hopefully, I could shift your opinion to subscribe, which you should do. Also, check out my Patreon, give me money, or else Take care of yourselves and have a nice, wonderful day.